Story 2. Witches. The 1970s came in, leaving the 60s far in the rear view. I really just was becoming an adult at age 19, or at least that's what I thought. I lived with my mom, Eva, and father, Willie. I was receiving my college education here in the city of Addington and working until midnight as a waitress at the diner down the street from my house. My parents had survived almost divorcing, but tensions were strained around the house. Mom had an affair after she found out that Dad had been sleeping with his old school love. Two rights don't make a wrong, but I think cheating on him made her feel like she'd evened the score. Maybe their love just persevered. I thought about these things as I prepared to take my group trick-or-treating. These were neighborhood kids, whom I babysat for money on the side. I did not like them, to be honest, but it was extra money. A friend named Amelia would be going with us. My brother had left home earlier. That was who had always taken me trick-or-treating, but he and Dad clashed heads constantly until he turned 17, and then he just headed west and never looked back. I'd missed him, but grown indignant at the fact that he just left. I'd done better than him by almost 2 years. I remember that last argument. My brother and Dad had to be separated by my mom just after they'd started throwing fists. I remember my dad making contact and seeing the blood trickle down my brother's face. I never had been angrier, but I did not know who to be angry with. I guess I could say that despite his faults, he was a good daddy to me, and I loved my mom as well. Recently, new neighbors had moved into the house across the way, and I'd made quick friends with the daughter, Amelia. She was very fun, though a bit loose, and she already had her eyes on half the guys in the neighborhood. "Oh, I'd like to shag him," she'd say, or, "Look at that guy, he's the bee's knees." Maybe that's what they teach them in England. Still, she was fun, and her accent was amusing. They were very posh, and her family was pretty loaded. Her dad was some kind of rare art collector, and her mom ran a company that put out a very artsy home decor magazine. I thought the parents were a bit eccentric, even creepy, to be honest. They didn't seem all that friendly. Amelia was an only child. Right before we left, she said she had something to tell me later and to remind her. The trick-or-treating was fun. It was a throwback to the innocence and purity of childhood. We collected a crop of candy and looked on as the ghosts and ghouls floated through the street. I basked in the glow of the lights and shimmering colors of every masked fiend, while Amelia brazenly flirted at every stop. The kids really enjoyed themselves, too. Fun now, and tummy aches later, my mom always said. That chilly night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning. There was something that I saw earlier that kept playing over in my mind as I dreamed. The 4 people on the corner across the street who watched us. They were dressed as witches. I could see they were adults, their green faces staring intently. I saw one of them beckon us. I awoke, and I wondered if Amelia had seen them. It was probably insane of us going trick-or-treating anyway, as there had been a few murders nearby recently. The police had given the guy a name, the Alden Marsh Slayer. 2 of his victims were found floating, headless, and totally drained of blood in the marsh. Didn't take a genius to figure out where the name came from. Sally Kurland was one of the victims, and her husband was a suspect, because everyone knew he beat Sally. The other was unidentified, a guy whom no one knew. At that moment, I heard a knock on the door. I rolled out of bed onto my knees and stood up, but the fog of sleep was still in my eyes. I took a while fiddling for my house shoes. My parents likely didn't hear the door. A crash of thunder and greenish-blue lightning lit the stairwell. "Who is it?" I said, but the person didn't say anything and just knocked again. I chained the door. "Hello?" I asked. "Hello," the voice said. "I'm Mason Jacobs. I'm a friend of your brother's." "My brother?" "Yes, he sent me. You're Franny, right?" I opened the door further with the chain still on. The smell of the storm rushed in then, and I noticed the person getting pelted by rain. He peered down at my nightgown through the open crack. "Yes, I'm Francesca." "He's in a lot of trouble," the man said. "How much trouble?" I asked, noticing the stranger's brow was arching. "Well, he's missing. We've not seen him in a while. I think he ran afoul of the wrong person, and I think there's a good chance he is, well, I'm sorry to say, but... His voice trailed off. Okay, someone's coming. I have to go. Wait, I said. You can't just go like this. Who are you and what are you talking about? However, he just insisted he must go. Here's my number. Call me tomorrow at 7 p.m. and I'll tell you more. There are some things I need to check on. Please, don't tell anyone about this. I know it's asking a lot, but especially not your parents. What? I said. Why not? Please, he said. Please. Just like that, the stranger was gone. Now I really was worried. On a day when my brother was so close to my thoughts, I get this news? About 3 seconds later, a car pulled into the driveway next door. Amelia's mom got out of the car. Then she did something odd. She stopped, turning toward me very robotically as if she was sniffing the air. I went into the house. I felt led to wake my parents and mention what had happened, but then I thought it might be better just to find out more first. Still, I went to shake them awake, but the closer I got to their room, I just felt I shouldn't. For the rest of the night, I lay awake thinking about what this stranger had said. Could I trust this person? How long before we should go to the police? No sooner had I glanced at the clock, I felt something grab my arm. Feeling the digits of the bony fingers, I turned to look next to me in the bed, and I started screaming. It was my brother. He shook his head as if saying no. His eyes were piercing, and his skin felt clammy and tough. It looked pale with its bluish dead hue, and there were bones poking out from where his cheeks were. I saw something on the floor behind him, but I could not move to get the full view, and it was moving slowly toward the bed. I felt it slip under the bed, and then I awoke. I was overcome by sadness, and the realization that it had been a dream did nothing for me. The next day, the afternoon shift called. The owner, Pat Sr., had just had a son. He had named him Patrick Jr., and he was so happy to be a father. He had been going around telling everyone how one day his son would own the diner, just like his father before him, and his father before him, and so on down the line. Most of the day was a blur as I waited to call the stranger. I had developed quite a few questions to ask him about my brother. I couldn't get the nightmare out of my head. Usually the logical one. I was acting illogically, I thought. Outside, the day had grayed, and there were fewer people coming in than in the warmer months. I didn't mind the locals, as everyone here was quite friendly. The fast raindrops violently tapped the window for a bit, and I waited, watching the huge, ominous puddles form outside. The news said we'd been having record-level rainfall, and that this was the least amount of sunshine we'd ever had on record. Someone put a quarter in the jukebox and played the song, Strangers in the Night. A little company was good to have as I thought more about this stranger. Strange was the right word, no matter how attractive he might seem. The strangeness of the situation just shined through. Whenever my mind was busy like this, the warmth and smells of the diner always were comforting. The time had come, and I picked up the heavy black diner phone and began to dial the number, when just at that moment, he walked through the door. "What are you doing here?" I said. "Don't worry," he cautioned. "I wanted to talk in person. I thought a public place would be good. I know you are wary of me." "Wouldn't you be wary?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "And to be honest, I just didn't want to be alone," he said, wiping his face with a tissue. "I was waiting all day for this moment. I need to talk to someone about this. If you feel afraid, just know I will not harm you." "Okay," I said. "Have a seat over there." I pointed him to the no smoking section in the corner. "I'll be with you in a moment." I put a pot of night brew on. Most of the people who came in would be requesting coffee, so I was going to have it ready. I watched Mason. He does look like a very troubled man, but troubled about what? He was taller than me, as he looked at least 6 feet tall, and I am 5'8". He was very handsome, in a 50s movie sort of way. He stared out the window as if he was trying to see something. His hair was dark and squarely styled, with a curl hanging in front, and he removed his long black coat. I'd imagine he was 10 years older than me. I went to his table and asked if he would like some coffee. He said, "Thanks. Black, please." I filled it up. That exact minute, I heard the phone ring. "Just a minute," I said to him. "Sorry." I picked up the phone, and whoever it was on the other end breathed heavily. And then there were noises that sounded like a dog growling, and then he hung up. "It was nobody," I told him. "Did you hear growling noises?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And breathing?" "How did you know that? Did you put someone up to calling?" "Okay. Will you sit down?" I noticed the urgency in his voice, so I sat, feeling very unnerved by the call. "The first time I met your brother, he broke into the church I was in. We'd been having a lot of break-ins, and odd items were going missing. One night, someone broke in and stole a giant cross, but didn't touch the pan of collection money. That was weird. So as the acting preacher, I decided to stay the night there a time or two a week." "You're a preacher?" I said, feeling a little relaxed to hear he supposedly was. "So my brother was into burglary?" "No, but your brother held a gun on me. I thought I was dead. He pushed me into a room and made me hear his story. To be honest, it started out a jumble of craziness, but when he got going, the story was so interesting I almost forgot he had a gun. He didn't sound crazy to me, and he should have. The first words he said to me were, 'They could be anywhere or anyone.' These are the words you should always remember. Your brother ran a small paper. This is another thing that added credibility. I checked this out. He ran a small paper on the occult, and he was on to the story of his life. He pushed it so far as to learn of a gathering of these elite people. He thought it would be some hokey ceremony, and he was partly right. It was hokey looking at first. Then came the sacrifice. From his view, he thought it was fake, till they all began stabbing the girl. Your brother told me he couldn't get those screams out of his head. He wanted to help her, but he knew he didn't stand a chance. Then they all removed their masks to take pieces of her flesh to eat, and then sip her blood from a goblet. He recognized some of the faces as a who's who. He recognized famous personalities. Your brother escaped that night into the shadows, and if only he would have stopped there. But something carried him forward. He didn't go to the police. He went and infiltrated 2 more ceremonies. He told me that something in the last ceremony scared him even more than the first. He asked me if I had a cross on my person. I said no, not on me. And he handed me this. Mason pulled a cross out of his jacket pocket. It was beautiful as it sparkled in the diner light. Your brother seemed almost beside himself. It was like he knew he was going to die and wanted to tell someone who he thought could help. The time crept on, and your brother put the gun down. He told me about his family. He feared for you most of all. He said they would be coming for you, and he scribbled your name and address, not your number. He said that he had to leave, but if he didn't come back the next day, to find you and warn you. At just that moment, I noticed someone entering the diner. He sat at the counter. "Just a minute, sir," I told him. Mason stared at the person for a second. "Your brother thought that you might have trouble believing a stranger, so he gave me proof." I sat there listening to this story, and I looked Mason in the eyes, and it didn't seem to me like he was lying. "How can I trust you? What did my brother say to tell me?" "He said the night he left, he came into your room and painted the words, 'Goodbye, love forever, your brother.'" "No, that wasn't it," I said. "It said, 'Love you forever, Franny.' So what happened next? This is still a bit much to take in, so my brother didn't come back that day? Where is he? What are your ideas? Could he just be hiding?" Just at that moment, the phone rang, but this time the voice on the other line was my father. "Baby, it's your dad. Sit down, there's something I need to tell you. It's your friend Amelia. She was found 2 blocks from the diner. She was in a bad condition. She's been murdered." I gasped at the sheer shock of what I was being told. "I want you to lock up the diner, sweetie. I'm coming to get you. Are you there?" "Yes, Dad, I'll lock up," I said with my voice quivering. I looked up to see that the person who sat down was now gone. "What's wrong?" Mason said. "It's my friend Amelia. She's been killed 2 blocks from here," I said, shocked. "I'm so sorry to hear that," he said. "Can I call you a cab?" My mind was already reeling from him, a stranger who shows up in town with a mysterious story about my brother, and then suddenly my friend is dead. Mason got his coat. Francesca, I'm sorry. I have to go. You're thinking nice, quiet town. The outsider must be the bad guy. I swear I had nothing to do with this, and I took a great risk coming here. You see, the people after your brother are also after me. They may have followed me. I have something to show you. He unbuttoned his shirt. On his chest, there was a huge scar. I was walking into the church that night to see if your brother was there. The story was so interesting to me that I didn't really think about the danger from your brother or from these people, and out of nowhere I'm grabbed by hooded, clothed figures, and one slashes me with a knife. I grew up a lot that night. The only thing that saved me was that I yanked on the alarmed church doors, and they, thinking they'd done enough damage, fled, or so I thought. These guys looked like something out of a movie. They wore hooded black robes with white masks. Now, this is what scared me. The guy who came to take my police report at the hospital was strange. I believed he was one of them, as he tried to make it my fault, and he said your brother's name before I recall giving him the name. That's something that came to me later. I'm going to go now. There are car lights. Does this place have a back entrance? Yes, I said, ushering him into the kitchen, and turning back just in time to see my father rush through the door, arms outstretched. I'm so sorry, he said, wrapping them around me. Sorry for everything. Over the next few days I went through the motions, thinking of all that Mason had said and wondering when he would make contact again. There were similar murders happening in places that were not Addington. Amelia's death really affected everyone. I felt like my emotions had been bleached. I stared at a picture of us, and we could be sisters, her face slightly fuller than mine, with her blue eyes sparkling. It was always quiet, but now it was unusually so. Everyone around me started to seem a bit strange. I was wrestling with it all. I don't know what stopped me from calling the cops. I went to Amelia's parents' home to pay my condolences. Her mom brought me to her room to show me something Amelia had been working on. This was the nicest her mom had ever acted toward me. Amelia had just started knitting. She was making me a shawl to go around me. I teared up and sat on her bed. Her mother left the room, saying she'd give me a little time alone. As I got up, a diary fell from under the mattress. I picked it up to put it back, but then I noticed my name on the page. I heard her mother coming, and I stuffed the small diary into my pocket. The rain really was pouring down again. I watched a person in a bright red raincoat run up the stairs to the house across the street, watching as a few cars splashed by, thinking about the mystery that had entered my life. That night, I sat in front of the church alone. It was the viewing of Amelia's body. My dad had asked to be there, but I asked for time alone to say my goodbyes. I told her all about Mason, and I asked her if I could trust him or not. I imagined her getting out of her coffin. She looked so alive. I went to touch her face, and her eyes opened, and she looked at me with a haunting smile. And then they were closed again. I knew it was just a figment of my imagination. I walked to the back of the church to take a break, and there was Mason. Franny, there's something I need to tell you. What? I asked brashly. Why are you here? It's something about Amelia. Why do you have a stake in your hand? I asked, stepping back. He put up his hand. You can trust me. I need to put the stake in your friend's heart before she comes back. Are you crazy? I asked. No, he said. But lately, I'm teetering over the edge. You don't know what I've seen. I only told you part of the story. Since that night at the church with your brother, I've seen some crazy stuff, Franny. We don't have much time. I'll tell you everything later. Right now, I have to do this. No, you aren't stabbing her with a stake, I said, pushing him. You're some insane person. Why are you doing this? My brother is probably still out there. Get out, you crazy bastard. Get out, I said, pushing him through the door and locking it. I turned around, crying, to see that Amelia was nowhere in the coffin. I glanced around. Had Mason somehow stolen her body? What kind of sick person was this? Who had I let into my life? I then heard something. A faint sound, sort of like a low-pitched growl. It was like that phone call. A sense of dread washed over me as I peered upward. My eyes met with Amelia staring down at me. Her back was arched like a cat, and she was crawling slowly on the ceiling, but only her face was turned to me. If this was a nightmare, I was ready to wake up. I felt myself paralyzed, staring into the flames of her yellow eyes. While this thing was crawling at me, I could only think about the fair my father took me to at 7, with the sweet smell of cotton candy. With my ears, I could hear nails scraping the ceiling and a shallow whisper calling my name. It was like experiencing many emotional states at once, happiness underlined with dread and being somewhere stuck in between. She was now on the floor, crawling towards me while holding eye contact. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the candles that lined the wall around the church flicker. I felt the strangeness of knowing I was being hypnotized and wanting out, but wanting to stay in as well. I could see her eyes now were totally gone. All that was left were leathery slits. Her body was contorting in so many ways inhuman. A lovely white wreath was around her head. I knew if I stood there, I was going to die. As she got closer, I could feel the coldness. Her beautiful red dress dazzled, looking so much like the raincoat I'd seen earlier. Her teeth weren't normal. They were like animal teeth. In the end, it was Mason who broke through the door and plunged the wood through her heart as she cried out. I stood numb as she lay there, dying a second time, peering at me as her eyes closed. "Come on! Others will be coming for her. They're going to be really, really pissed." "Thank you. I'm so sorry," I said as he grabbed my hand. He took me outside and put me in a car. "I had to save you." "How did you know where I was, anyway?" "I didn't, but I suspected where when I heard exactly how your friend was killed from your boss while at the diner today. So tonight I thought I'd stop by." My heart was still pumping. I was still so very afraid, like when you just wake up from a nightmare. "There's something I need to show you." "What happened to Amelia? How is that possible?" "There are a lot more things possible than I knew before I met your brother. Many things are now possible, Franny. I'm a person who believes in the devil's existence, but mostly in cruelty and how we treat each other. I was never expecting to run into him physically. I believe the Alden Marsh killer and these people are the same. I am sure of that." He took me to the Wyndham Hotel. I was more afraid of what I didn't know than being with this stranger. I was trying to take in all that had happened. I still couldn't grasp what I'd seen. I kept seeing flashbacks of Amelia's eyes and remembering my inability to move. "You were hypnotized." Mason's voice broke through my thoughts. "It's going to take a few days to recover fully. You'll have flashbacks of the incident. Sometimes they will be just as it occurred. Sometimes they will be much worse. These things, once they get in, I don't know if they ever get out of your mind, your thoughts. They breach you. I'll be here if you need me." "What is it you wanted to show me?" I said, hope and curiosity getting the best of me. "I have a book I want you to take and read." He went to the bed and picked up the mattress as the silky cover slid off. "It's their book," he said, handing it over. The cover read, "The Wisdom of the Witch." "The title of the book is Wisdom, and this hotel is called the Wyndham?" I said. "Yes," he said. "You're really quick. I did not think of that. After your brother confided in me, strange things started happening, and things that felt like a coincidence but weren't. People were following me, and I felt my family wasn't safe. I told my wife that we needed to leave. I told her to pack as much as she could. I told her what happened, but that last day I went to work as usual at my wife's insistence. I said goodbye to my congregation. I stayed till 7 p.m. talking with people, saying farewell, not letting on what was really happening. I just told them I had to leave town for a while. I had quite a few errands, and by the time I got home it was late. I opened the door. I called for my wife, Sarah. I called for my sons. The house was dark. I cut on some lights and they flickered. I ran upstairs, still calling. Then my wife answered me. She said she was in the attic. The stairs to the attic were let down. I thought maybe she was packing. I noticed unfamiliarity in her voice. Something inside me told me I shouldn't go up there, and when I stepped on the first rung of the ladder, fear overtook me, dread like you felt with Amelia. She called again, but there was something in her voice that unnerved me. I wanted to go, and yet I wanted to stay away. "Just like Amelia," I chimed in. She kept asking me to come to her. With every rung of the ladder, I felt the air get colder and colder. A hollow, dead feeling crept inside me. I was truly scared, but couldn't stop my ascent. I thought of my dog, who I named Friend. He was hit by an Ace Movers shipping truck. I tried to save him, but I couldn't. It was pitch dark and so cold I could see my breath. When I flicked on the light at the top of the attic, flies hit me in the face, trying to gather warmth. What I saw up there will haunt me forever. It had the voice of my wife, but it didn't look like my wife. Her teeth had grown. Her face had changed. My 2 sons, 4 years and 12 months, lay in a heap, and they were pale and drained of all blood. I ran over to them, holding their cold, sticky, stiff bodies in my arms. I'll never forget that. There was no life left in them. I exploded in tears. My youngest still had his feeding bib on. I looked up to see that she was foaming at the mouth, and she laughed. She laughed, the most wicked, evil, inhuman laugh. She moved towards me with the most beautiful red eyes and a slight hint of the smell of rat. In my mind, I saw our first meeting, the first time we made love, her having our children, our wedding. I would have been done for. But when she got close enough, she reached for the cross around my neck and tried to take it off. Instead, it repelled her, the very cross she'd given me as a gift. Only in that instant she looked at me did I see anything of the old her. I grabbed at the cross your brother had given me, still in my pocket, and with that, she was gone. She jumped through the attic window. I don't know how they got her, except that she let someone in. I can't talk about this anymore, he said. When he finished talking, he was slightly shaking. I'm going to take you home. Read the book. Take this. He handed me a cross to wear around my neck and a little flask. It's holy water, he said. I blessed it myself. On the way home, we talked precautions. I was worried that my father would come out when we reached the house. Mason said he'd make contact again to just sit tight. He also told me I wouldn't have to worry about going to Amelia's funeral, and that they'd already come to take her body. Sure enough, the next morning my father informed me that Amelia's body had been stolen. The town's sheriff questioned me politely over the incident, and I almost decided to tell him everything, but didn't. Over the next few days, I read the big book. I lugged it everywhere with me. Its contents were extremely interesting and scary, considering it was about a cult and witches. These weren't your ordinary witches, if such a thing exists. These witches believed in all types of things. They worshipped trans-dimensional beings, which, judging by the description of these things, the idea of the devil isn't too far off. These things require flesh and blood to survive, and they fed. Vampires. They sounded like vampires. I'd read mythical novels before, but this book seemed to become scarier and scarier as I read. One story told of a small town where the children began going missing. There was a barkeep, and he was sure that witchcraft and sacrificing was happening. The keep decided he'd lock all the members of the town into the pub and question everyone until the truth came out. He locked them in and chained the doors and windows. He began his questions. Who was the witch? He asked. Everyone denied being the witch. He grabbed a mirror. A mirror, he said, was given to him by a gypsy, and it was said to have the power to reveal who the witch was. He lifted it up to the 9 people. He began shaking as it revealed that all 9 were witches. The owner fell to the floor. He died of his own fright. So were the stories in the book. It told of future events. It talked about the dead walking again, and it gave specific dates. It shed light into their world and on their rules. The one oath is to always fit in, it said, to fit in with normal people. There were little inscriptions. A future stained with blood, catastrophes unheard, betwixt time and absurd, till time be no more. It was poetic. It was blunt, and it frightened me more than anything had. I checked the printing date. How could this have been pre-written? It spoke of things that had just occurred and things that would. I began to feel I was a small cog in a big machine. A fly with polka-dotted wings landed on the book. I watched as it floated off in what almost looked like slow motion. I should take this book to the police. How could it speak of a marsh killer? That's what I decided to do. I felt a bit like I was betraying Mason, but this was too crazy. I marched right out of my room. It was time to get my parents in on this too. I looked all around the house and called out, but found no one. Then I heard the water on in the bathtub. I opened the door to my parents' private bathroom, and I let out a gasp. The walls were painted in red, sticky globs, with what looked like chunks of skin attached. Frozen. I walked to pull back the shower curtain. My hand immediately stuck to the curtain. I pulled the curtain back to see what looked like the lifeless body of my father. His face was submerged under the bloody water which had overflowed onto the floor. I stuck my hand into the water and lifted his head. His features were barely recognizable. His graying hair was caked with blood. I backed away from the scene and slipped on the floor, landing in the bloody water. I lay there for a minute as chunks of skin floated by, and then, in severe shock, I felt cold. My eyes closed, and I slept. I dreamed my father rose out of the water and stared at me. He'd slide down in the bloody water and then slowly slide up again, the look on his face set in stone. I screamed, and then I dreamed that Mason was speaking to me. When I awoke, I was back at the place Mason was staying. "My father," I said, barely able to speak as my throat was still knotted and dry. "What happened to my father?" "They did this," Mason said. "Your father was sacrificed." "Why?" I said. "Why?" "Your father was one of them. I checked for their mark. Your neighbors are them. They are everywhere and could be anyone. Your father might have killed Amelia for them. This was in the bathroom," he said, and lifted up Amelia's dress. "No, I don't believe you." "They are growing. Are you beginning to understand? Do you see what we're up against? These people are like a plague. They set precedents in place. They are the law enforcement. I checked your house when you didn't answer the door, and I found that door open." "No," I said. "What did you do to my mom?" "Your doctor, your dentist. The world is getting smaller. The book is about one world order under chaos. Did you read the part about the plague? What they plan to unleash? I've been watching you and the people in your life for months now." "You're crazy," I said to him. "No, you're wrong," I said, knowing deep down he maybe wasn't. "Did you kill my father? Is this some sick, twisted game of yours? Where's my mother?" "I want you to come with me." "Come with you? Why not call the cops? Why not?" "Because I've had all the opportunity in the world to kill you and I haven't. I saved you from Amelia, or have you already forgotten? If I ask a lot of you, it's because I know the stakes are that high. I'm trying to save your life while I try to stay alive myself. I'm just trying to stay ahead of these people," he said, putting his hand on my face and staring into my eyes. "I'm trying to avenge my children. My son would have been one today. Your brother trusted me to save you. He told me what to tell you, and that's what I'm trying to do. If I had killed your father, I'd be covered in blood. When I brought you here, you were laying in blood, and I know you couldn't have done that. I'm scared too, and I thought about just disappearing. It would be easier, but I couldn't just leave you to a similar fate as your brother. If you want me to do that, I can. Just let me know." "I can't just leave my father there in that tub." "I checked his pulse, Fran. He's gone." "Okay," I said. "Okay, show me then. Show me, or I'm getting off this train at the next stop and telling everyone what's going on." "You'd only be telling them you know, and they will stop you before you tell anyone." I knew he was sincere. I knew it, but in a way I didn't want to know. "You've got this all figured out? Then I have a question for you, Mason. Were those sacrifices?" "I don't know, Franny. I haven't figured that out yet, but it looks like they were to feed one of them." "Okay, one more question. Where's my mom?" "My guess is that she left willingly. Your brother knew that your parents were into witchcraft. He made the connections. He seemed to think your father was more so than your mum. He didn't know how far in they were. That is what started his journey into this whole thing. He wanted to find out. I think your mum might have been more skilled at this charade, though. Your brother feared them. That's why he left." I interrupted. "Why are you just telling me this?" He looked down slightly and said, "Because I knew you wouldn't accept it, what I had to say, if I'd included your parents. I knew I was taking a risk. I also had someone checking up on them. Your brother said that your parents would ritually abuse him. They did all sorts of unspeakable things to him. Some included chicken sacrifices and spiders. Your brother remembered their symbols, and he went looking. Let me ask you this about your parents. Your father, did he disappear during long periods of time? Think about it. I thought about it, and putting it all together in my head, came up with something that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I had seen items around the house and in their room. I never paid them any mind. I mean, my parents had a painting. Surely it was just a painting, but there was a coven in it. My father disappeared once a month to the cabin for fishing. The cabin at Martine's Creek. How did you know about that? I asked. Your brother, he said. If you want answers, that's where we need to go. We went outside after wrapping crosses around our necks and got into the vehicle. But by the time we hit the highway, the rain was pouring down. I'm going to pull off the next exit. It's raining too badly, he said, as if asking if it was okay with me. Yeah, I said. My thoughts and emotions were becoming so mixed. I was feeling so unglued inside, worrying if someone had found my father and noticed I was missing. Would they think I did it? We pulled into a restaurant lot. Are you hungry? He asked. No, I'm crazy, I said, snapping. I'm sorry, I said. It seems like all you've done was try to help me, but my dad's gone and I'm not even going to the police. My mom's missing and I haven't reported it, and on top of all that, they possibly abused my brother. I'm going so far in the words of a stranger. Then he did something I didn't expect. He put his arm around me and pulled me closer. I know how you feel. When they got my wife, I had no one to turn to, no one to tell. At that moment, I heard a rustling, windy noise and the small sound of a toy flute. Then it happened. The whispering. It was so odd that I could hear this music. It sounded Irish. Mason, what is that? I asked. But he just looked hypnotized. Mason! I called him again. Out of the shadows walked a little boy. He saluted us. It can't be, Mason spoke, breaking the silence. Just then, a rat scurried by, almost as if something was attracting it. The boy grabbed the rat quickly and began biting into it viciously, till his once pale face was a cherry red. His eyes darted around as if eating the rat had given him great pleasure. He then turned his attention to us. I can only describe what I felt as sheer terror. Get out of the car, Dad. If you don't, I'll have to come in. I want to take you to Mom, he continued. You left us, Dad. We were cold and lonely. He can't come in, Mason said. He isn't invited. The boy looked as if he was getting angry. It's a rental, I see, he said, showing his teeth. You don't own it, do you? He can't get in, Mason repeated, but he'll do everything to try and trick us out. Mason rolled down the window. Come here, son. The boy moved closer to the window. Don't look directly at its eyes. Mason shielded my face partly. Tune him out as much as you can and don't believe anything it says. Daddy, can you sing good night to me? The boy growled with an evil laugh that ended in a hiss. Do you know what Mommy said about you? She said you left us. You aren't my son, Mason shouted, whisking the holy water out the window. The boy appeared as if someone had thrown lighter fluid on him. He began to cry in agony. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry. I love you. And then he seemed to melt away. I love you too, son, Mason whispered, wiping away a tear and sitting back in his seat, perplexed. Can you drive? He asked, his voice breaking. Yes, I said. But can I just slide over you? I don't want to open the door. I gently transitioned myself into the driver's seat as he slid to the passenger side. Why do you think they have to be invited in? Was the only thing I could say in the mounting silence. Why not just bust the windows? He looked out of the window back towards where his son had been before dissolving into nothing. He then put his head back and said, I read a book about there being no soul, so that if a demon inhabits the victim, that's what can't come in without an invitation. That part, it's always been like this, he explained. You play with a Ouija and open a doorway. Same with tarots. You invite them in. You ask for them, and your spirit signs off on the contract. The book says there's some grand rule that nothing can happen to us unless we're at least partly willing. The outside, however, is the wild. The places we go when our parents aren't looking, hopping the gate to the curious, strange neighbors down the block, never to be seen again. The demons have permission to roam the wild, it seems, until we let them in. In the wild, we go out to them. We talked about a mix of everything as we made our way to the cabin, and some of it was really scary. It felt like this was just a nightmare and I wasn't waking up, but in a way I was. The world wasn't what I thought it was. It was a place where true evil existed and things went unseen. We talked about my childhood, my father, my mother, and things I remembered about my brother. We drove a half day and we were both so tired, so we decided we'd check into a motel. I needed a shower, so I hopped into the tub, which probably wasn't a good idea, because as I showered, I could see my father lying in the tub, bludgeoned. Even worse, I started to remember little games my parents played with me, such as locking me up in a closet, seeing how long I could take it before I screamed out. I never liked that game. Then there was the time they told me to stand on a pentagram made of chalk. These were childhood memories I'd suppressed, but now I was remembering. Was it true? Were they witches? I climbed out of the bath to see Mason curled up on the bed. He looked asleep, so I just sat in the chair next to him, watching over him. The next thing I remembered was waking up to the smell of chicken. Delicious fried chicken. Not unlike the kind that I used to make at work, the kind Pat specialized in. And there were biscuits, coleslaw, mashed potatoes, and gravy. Oh my gosh, gravy. Wow, I said. Where did you get this? Not realizing how much I'd forgotten to eat lately. He sort of smirked at my excitement. There was a chicken place in the corner. I took a cross with me to the car and some more holy water. I must have looked like a slob. I ate 4 pieces to his too, and large amounts of the side dishes. Mason, thank you so much, I said, wiping my face. I hadn't really eaten in days, it seemed, and stress usually makes me eat more. He took a towel and cleaned my face, and our eyes met, and we were stuck in a moment. Just then someone knocked. Who is it? Mason yelled. It's Cass. Cass? Mason said, getting up to open the door. You're not invited in, he said as he opened it up. He opened the door and she walked across the threshold and hugged him. I'm glad you're still you, she said. Granny, this is Cass. She became your brother's friend. Cassandra here is also an insider. You mean she's one of them? I asked. Yes, she said in a smooth voice. I was raised into this. It's pretty much all I knew growing up, but when I got older, I realized I didn't want to be like them. I've been trying to find a way out ever since, but you see, they don't believe in you just walking out. So she's risking a lot coming here, Mason said. His words had an urgency to them, like I needed to accept this as he had. Cassandra walked to the bed and sat on the end. You mind? She asked, pulling a cigarette to her mouth. She was not what you'd expect for a person in a witch cult. She had a classic beauty about her, and she was very tall and slender. I noticed something between her and Mason, not unlike a woman and man who hadn't seen each other in a long time. Cassandra, what can you tell me about these people? I asked. I did the checking Mason asked me to do. Your mom is definitely a higher up, she said. I don't like telling you this, but she was willing to sacrifice you if need be. She took a hard puff, and the smoke swirled around the room. I don't believe that, I said to Cassandra. Well, I can prove it, she said. There should be a cut on one of your arms. It would be done with a razor blade. Only when you were sleeping, you'd have been drugged. I think you and Amelia were both meant to be sacrificed at this time. Peel up your shirt and look at your arm. It would have been X-shaped. Okay, I said. I don't have to peel up my shirt. The X shape is there. Are you telling me my mom gave me that? Okay then, Cassandra said. Fair enough. Do you remember your mother giving you tea or something? Did she ever give you tea out of the blue like that? Yes, she said. She gave me tea the other night. That's true, not something she usually did. She took another puff and crushed her cig. Trying to quit, she said. But it's been a little hard lately. These people are witches, as I'm sure Mason has told you. I guess the quickest way to explain their thought process is to tell you that they worship the hyena. The lion is the hyena's most natural enemy. The lion is strong and noble. It has its methods. The hyena is cunning, and there are many. Its methods are dark. It doesn't believe in honor, and it laughs as it rips its prey apart. It overwhelms with numbers as it knows it is weak alone. The females are the dominant ones of the species. I've seen so many things that haunt me. I feel like I've done things that won't allow God to have me. Have you ever heard of 666? Yes, I said. It's the devil's number, right? Do you know what you have to do to get that number? 666 crimes against humanity. 666 things that they chose for you to do. She pulled at her shirt sleeve. I saw a number written on her wrist. 57. Every time I do something evil, I get another number. I just got 57. What did you do to get number 57? I asked. Her eyes welled up with tears. Let's just say I'll always regret it. In my mind, I wondered about the worst thing she had done, but knew not to push. Each number represents a level of power. Each number opens a bigger door and adds a puzzle to the picture. The things you learn about the world are enough to drive you at first. Go to a diner, flash your number to the right person and you don't have to pay. Go to the best colleges. But after a while, none of it is worth it. Number 10 was lose my virginity before I was ready, she said. Your friend Amelia was number 56. I looked at her, shocked. What did you do? I said. No, she said. I didn't. Well, I had nothing to do with killing her. I did help them steal her body. I had to. No, you didn't, I screamed, unable to control myself. I did, she said. If you don't continue to work for them, you reach something they call your end line. If you haven't done what they ask by a certain date, then others begin to do things to you. I followed your brother that night. I saw him. They took him. Their idea was to kill him, but I fear they did something even worse to him. They buried him in a cemetery. I was told he's buried in a grave with others buried less than 6 feet deep. The reason for this is because he's going to ensure that their plans live on. Someday, someone will dig up that grave and unleash something. What, I'm not sure of. I'm not high enough to be privy to that information. I'm sorry. I know this is tough to hear. It may not even be true, just something they said around me. Some of them suspect me. I've made your friend mad, Mason. I'm going to leave now. If you're going to that cabin, be careful. They hold rituals there. One more thing. Your father was a grand wizard. He didn't give his life. They took it because he didn't want to sacrifice you, I believe. I looked at Cassandra, looked in her eyes, and knew she was telling the truth. I now felt even more upset about my brother. What number was my father? I asked. 325, she said. Your mom was 666. With that, she nodded and was out the door. You get some sleep, Franny, Mason said, fluffing the pillow. We've got a long drive tomorrow. I lay down. Everything felt so exhausting again. The thought of my mom being evil shook at me. I watched Mason staring at me. I needed to feel something else at that moment. I got up and went to him, and he put his hands on my face. It felt so good to have my attention focused elsewhere. I began to kiss his forehead. He cupped the side of my face. Do you really want to do this? He said. Yes, I said, and we began kissing. I've wanted this since I first saw you, he said. And that's when I felt it. Teeth burrowing through my neck. I tried to release myself. I imagine it was like trying to get off a hook, because no matter how much I struggled, the teeth just went in deeper. I saw Cassandra in the shadows grinning as her flesh began to peel away, revealing a slimy version of herself. Mason, stop, I said. Stop! With that, I woke up. It was all a dream. Mason was on the couch with the covers pulled over his head. I think it was the hallucinating Mason mentioned earlier. I thought, and then I went to sleep, just feeling confused, wishing for the intimacy that first dream had offered, but not the nightmare. That was horrible. In the morning, I got up and showered. Mason had left again. After 30 minutes, he walked through the door. Here, these are for you. Pants and a t-shirt. These are perfect. How did you know my size? You look about the same size as my wife. I just took a chance. Thank you, I said, going into the bathroom, closing the door and changing out of my old clothes. I stuffed them into a garbage bin. Let's go, I said. We need to figure this out. It was so odd. When we walked into the lot of the motel, I saw a pop machine, but I just had a weird feeling about this place, like it had some significance. Or maybe we were being watched. The cabin was about 4 hours away, and Mason drove. I just can't believe I just left my dad in a bathtub of water. I know, Mason nodded. But you didn't have a choice. We didn't have a choice. From the day I came into your life, I knew it wouldn't be the same again. All the time, waiting to tell you about your brother. The moment of actually doing it, I almost didn't. I knew I was taking away your happy ending. I'm sorry. I just nodded, looking at him, wishing I could comfort him like he comforted me. We arrived at the cabin. It was intact. Nothing appeared out of order. I saw the big hula hoop I always used, hung over the fence. The giant trees lined the outer fields like soldiers, and there were various wood shacks spread over the property. Usually those harbored garden snakes. Franny, stay close. We don't have to worry about vampires yet, but henchmen may be here. He opened the glove compartment, pulling out a gun. No sooner had we stepped out of the car, my mother rushed out of the cabin. Franny, Franny, oh Franny, she said, rushing up to grab me. Get your hands off me! I pushed her away. Oh, Franny, what are you doing here? She said. Where is your father? You know damn well where he is, I said. Why, Mum? Why would you go along with this? Why would you hurt me like this? Dad? David? Oh, Franny, she said. What are you talking about? Let me see your number, Mum. Let me see the number. What number? She said. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time I saw her. I saw who she really was. I grabbed her shirt sleeve, lifting it up. No numbers? You bitch, she said, slapping me. You little bitch. My numbers aren't on my arm. I've graduated. Mason pulled a gun on her. You put that away, Mason, she said, sticking out her tongue suggestively at him. You won't use it. We have something of yours. In order to get it back, you're going to have to play a little game. You see, Cass is being tortured at this very minute. If you don't come with me, we will kill her and you won't see her again. Do you remember the night of comfort you shared? Well, guess who got pregnant? That's right. She's pregnant with your baby. I saw Mason freeze up. My mom asked him to hand over the gun. No, he said. Are you out of your mind? You take me to Cass. My mom looked like a cat with a mouse in its grasp. One motion from me, and they'll cut off her finger. You bastard, you don't know who you're dealing with. You bitch, I said. How can you do this? How can I not? They offered me everything. I never even wanted to have kids. That was your father's idea. But then I saw the beauty of it. Born to be sacrificed to them. It would be a greater sacrifice. It would have meaning, giving them your own flesh and blood, trading something you don't want for the greatest power you ever knew. How stupid have you been, Fran? Amelia's parents saw the beauty in that. That little slut would have been gutted by your own father, but they had other plans. We have a saying, if you give something away and it comes back, it's yours. She came back. You won't. It was magical, fooling you all these years. No, Mother, you don't have to do this. She stared at me blankly. No emotion seemed to surface, other than she looked like she was enjoying every minute of this. We're surrounded, she said. You have come to your fate. People with black robes began coming out of the trees. Give me that gun, or you'll never see the child your whore carries in her. Mason looked around. We were surrounded by about 40 people now. The last thing I remember is tussling while someone put a rag over my face. It was damp, and then I slowly felt myself slip into unconsciousness. When I awoke, I saw Cassandra. She was tied to the pipes in the basement of the cabin, and so was I. She looked like someone had beaten her badly. Her lips looked swollen, and her face was black and blue. Franny, she said, we've got to get out of here. They're going to sacrifice Mason. Then we're next. Cassandra, is it true you're pregnant? I asked. It's true, she said, pulling at the pipes as I was doing. Mason and I, we had one night. Does he know? She asked. Yeah, my mom told him. They hadn't tied one of my hands as tightly. Cassandra, look, I said, freeing my hand. I worked at the other knot while Cassandra watched in silence. She hoped that I could free myself, but I wasn't strong enough. In that moment, I remembered the cross Mason had given me. I grabbed it out of my pocket, and I worked at the knot with the pointy end for about 2 minutes, and then I was free. I began to work at Cassandra's wrists, freeing her one at a time. "Thank you," she said. Seeming weak, she grabbed a shovel. We grabbed each other's hand and slowly walked up the stairs. We could hear chanting now, loud, creepy chanting. It felt as if the cabin was vibrating with their words. "They're doing an awakening ceremony. They're trying to bring something into this world. They wanted me to sacrifice Mason, and I told them to go to hell. Whoever makes the sacrifice gets 10 numbers, so all of them want to do today's sacrifice. Whatever this is, it's a bigger deal than before." We crept to a darkened window and looked out. There in the distance was something outside of my wildest imagination. I could make out Mason tied to a table. The robed people now had on goat heads. Some of the people who had captured us were gone from earlier. "If we can get a car," Cassandra said, "I think maybe we should crash their little party." We creaked the cabin door open and slipped to where the car was parked. Cassandra settled into the passenger side. They really had hurt her. She wasn't moving well, and she grimaced. I could not believe the luck that Mason had left the key in the ignition. I started the car, shifting into drive, and I wondered if they heard. I drove around the cabin and toward the massive crowd. I'll never forget the sounds, the squishing and thumping sounds that me hitting those people made. I plunged the car right through the crowd. While they were still in the chaos, I jumped out of the car and tried to free Mason. I got one hand free. The crowd of people had parted. Besides the screaming injured, they began to gain their composure, and my mother and Amelia's parents took off their masks. My mother reached for the gun from her robe, and she pointed it at me. "This was supposed to be easy. You were going to be a sacrifice. You're still a virgin. We saved you for this moment. But then something even better fell into our hands. A tainted holy man. We thought the ones we were raising would appreciate this as an appetizer. But now we're going to sacrifice all 3 of you." Just then, the hooded person from behind her grabbed her and grabbed the gun away from her. The person tossed me a tree branch and told everyone not to move as he pointed the gun. He pulled off his mask. "Franny, it's me," he said, his voice breaking. I almost came to tears upon seeing the face of my brother David after all these years, now so grown. "Get back!" he yelled at them, shooting one of them into the dirt. Cassandra had started the car again. I wrestled Mason free. My mother grabbed at the gun, and my brother fired once as she clinged to his arm. I took the branch and struck her in the head. Her blood sloshed into the air, covering us. I felt a searing pain in my arm, and then I heard voices in the trees, and the ground began to shake. The woman I thought loved me lay dead on the ground. The robed people acted like they didn't know what was going on. We heard screaming and wailing coming from all around us, and some of them tried to run. We could see them being pulled into the trees by an unseen force. I can't describe the fear and sheer terror. It was paralyzing, but we made it to the car and got in. "Just drive, drive," I said to Cassandra. In the distance, you could hear the screaming and see what the force was doing. It was as if something was ripping their flesh off, eating it, and spitting the bones back. "Ouch!" I cried out because my arm was hurting. Mason asked if I was okay. I shook my head yes. "Where do we go?" Cassandra asked. "There's a church," Mason said. "It's in Deertown, 100 miles away. Let us start there. Are you all right?" he asked Cassandra. "Are you really pregnant?" Before he could get that sentence fully out, she said, "Yes." I looked through the back window often to see if we were being followed. My brother told me how he had escaped where they were holding him with the help of a mystery person. He said they were going to sacrifice him that night, and they did bury someone alive, but it wasn't him. He thanked Mason for saving me and looked confused when hearing of Dad's death. We all seemed shaken and found more comfort in silence at the moment. Someone would ask a question, and there would be an explosion of speech, and then silence again. In the twilight of the car, with my brother now driving, Cassandra was tired and resting, and Mason's head rested in my lap as he'd been beaten. I parted his hair. He rubbed my face, and I looked into his eyes. I saw Cassandra take her hand and put it on her stomach momentarily. I looked back down at Mason, and as he drifted off to sleep, he mouthed the words, "Thank you." Later, I'd read Amelia's diary, and it would reveal some shocking things. But as for this night, I felt the pain in my arm again. I rolled up my shirt sleeve and looked at my wrist. There was a green number 10 etched in my skin. I dreamed I saw Amelia standing in the road, looking upset as my brother and Cassandra turned to me and started laughing. I then awoke, and Mason's words came back to me. They could be anyone.